Welcome, I'm Jeanette, the North Dawn Coach. I'm so glad you're joining me today as we continue to dive into what do we need to be thinking about if we're in the position of being in a current role, but feeling like it's time for a change. Perhaps it's time for a small change, perhaps it's time for a larger transition, or another word to describe that might be a career pivot. So what do you do when we're in that situation? And last week, I talked about the importance of identifying stories that we might be telling ourselves about the situation we're in, particularly the negative stories that are causing us to think, oh, maybe a change is in the air. And that if we take the time to pause and re-examine the facts or the data around any particular situation that comes up, that we might draw different conclusions than kind of the tried and true conclusions that we're reaching based upon our prior experiences with these scenarios. That there may be different conclusions to draw relative to the things that are happening at in the role that are perhaps leading then to this feeling of I've got to make a change. And if that's the case, if we identify that there are different stories, that there are different conclusions that we can draw from what's happening of a more positive nature, then maybe we don't want to do that career transition or pivot. Maybe we want to make some changes internally so that we can adjust both our mindset and thinking around these stories, but also what we're doing internally to make it a greater fit. Now, what I asked you to do last week, if you were interested in pursuing this, is continue to examine what's happening over the course of the week. And as stories occur to you, think about what's a different version of that. And so to examine those negative stories in particular. So if you've done that, you may have noticed some things. You will have noticed some things, I'm pretty confident, around that. And that will then lead to, okay, I think in general, maybe I need to re-examine this and look at some what I can do internally, or it may be time for a change. If in fact this is confirming for you that it is time for a change or a transition or a pivot, then we need to look at, okay, well, what kind of change would be the one that would best meet your needs at this point? And what I want to offer is, although it may be tempting to go for the big change or the dramatic change, to really try something very different, and that may be where you land ultimately. Before you do that, let's look at some of the smaller changes that we can think about. So the smaller changes are going to be the things that are like the slightest tweak in the next thing that can bring fulfillment and satisfaction. So when you think about what those opportunities might look like, maybe you're working in a fairly large department or a functional area of an organization. Maybe it's about making a switch out of your current team into a different team. Maybe it's about making a switch even smaller than that in terms of kind of the bigger ripples of change around looking for something that is still in your same team, but a different role. Those are they're big in one sense, but they're smaller in terms of all of the ripples of change that might happen from that. So what are those kind of internal opportunities that you might have closest in? If you picture this sort of as a bullseye, these are the kind of changes that are right there in the center where you sit right now. Then a little bit wider than that, we might think about, okay, if I'm part of a fairly large organization, what are some of the opportunities that might be available across the institution? So getting into a different area, not your team, not your functional area, but something that would bring about change but stay within your same organization. Then wider still, we can think about, okay, let's leave the current organization. Let's go for something else out there, but in a similar role, just a different organization. Or now we get wider, we're thinking about things that might be functional changes in the kind of work you're doing, but taking some of those transferable or the skills that go with you, despite the functional expertise needing to change. Some of those other skills, how can you use those in other positions? And you can see that we go wider and wider. But what I want to suggest in this video is let's start at the center of the bullseye. Let's figure out the things that are closest in so that we have less of the ripples of change and less of the variables to think about. It's a lot more manageable that way. It doesn't mean that we don't have the opportunity to think about all of these things. What I'm offering is a process and a structure to how to do this in an efficient and, excuse me, to do this in an efficient and a productive way. So do some work on that this week, if that's the category that you fall into. Bring out a document, bring out a spreadsheet, take some notes on what those thoughts are. What are the opportunities that are closest into the center of the bullseye? What does it look like if you move further out? And then next week, I will be back with another topic related to this one as we move along, thinking about what comes next if you're thinking about a transition or a pivot in your future. I want to also offer to you that if it would be useful, I'm happy to extend a free 45-minute career strategy session that's available to you by clicking the link in the description box and looking for a time that will meet both of our schedules. All right, that's it for this week. Take care, and thanks for watching.